Africa is no longer the vast, untapped resource that the world once treated it as. It is not the battleground for foreign powers to settle their disputes, nor the warehouse of raw materials to be extracted for profit. Africa is rising, not as a symbol of subjugation, but as a powerful force that demands respect, equality, and, most importantly, sovereignty. Ibrahim Traoré, the 37-year-old president of Burkina Faso, has become one of the leading voices in this fight for African liberation. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has taken bold steps to break free from the lingering colonial powers, particularly France, which for decades has maintained a heavy military and economic presence on the continent. Ibrahim Traoré's rise to prominence has been nothing short of remarkable. In January 2022, he came to power after a military coup ousted the former president. Since then, Traoré has rapidly set the course for a radical shift in Burkina Faso's foreign and domestic policies. His message to the world, particularly to former colonial powers like France, is simple. Africa will no longer kneel before false generosity. When French President Emmanuel Macron recently commented on Africa's supposed ingratitude for French military interventions in the Sahel region, Traoré was quick to respond. Macron had called on African leaders to thank France for its military presence in the region, under the guise of helping fight terrorism. But Traoré, with his characteristic bluntness, called out France for its hypocrisy. For years, France has used its military presence as a pretext for maintaining control over African nations, all while extracting resources and undermining African sovereignty. The so-called generosity of France has been a smokescreen, masking a deeper agenda of exploitation and control. France exists today thanks to our ancestors, Traoré declared. They should pray for us, not ask us for thanks. The real question is, what has France truly given to Africa other than exploitation, manipulation, and interference? This strong statement is a rallying cry not only for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. It encapsulates the deep frustrations that many African leaders feel about the relationship between their countries and former colonial powers. Traoré's words have struck a chord with leaders across the continent, particularly those who have been long dissatisfied with the so-called partnerships that Western powers have offered. Burkina Faso, under Traoré, is at the forefront of a new era in African politics. In 2023, the country expelled French military forces from its territory, making it one of the first African countries to take such a drastic step. This move was symbolic of a broader shift in the region, with countries like Mali and Niger following suit and ejecting French forces from their borders. The message is clear. Africa is taking control of its own future, and it will not tolerate foreign domination any longer. Traoré's defiance of France and its military presence in Africa is not just a political statement. It is a revolutionary act. It represents a break from the colonial past, a refusal to accept the idea that Africa exists solely to serve the interests of foreign powers. His leadership has sparked a wave of anti-colonial sentiment that is sweeping across the continent, as African nations seek to reclaim their autonomy and independence. But Traoré's message is not just about rejecting France. It is about rejecting the very notion that Africa should be subordinate to any outside force. His vision for Africa is one where the continent stands tall, not as a beggar, but as a partner on the global stage. Africa will no longer kneel, he says, not to the false generosity of global politics, not to any nation or institution that seeks to exploit our people. The challenge to France's continued military presence in Africa is symbolic of a much larger struggle for African sovereignty. For too long, African nations have been subjected to the whims of foreign powers that have used aid, military presence, and economic dependency as tools to maintain control. The time has come for Africa to stand on its own, to reject the exploitation that has plagued it for centuries, and to chart its own path forward. Traoré is not just fighting for Burkina Faso, he is fighting for all of Africa. His defiance against the colonial legacy of France is part of a broader movement to end the exploitation of Africa's resources, both human and natural. The French military bases that have dotted the African landscape for decades are being dismantled, and with each base that is closed, a message is sent to the world. Africa will no longer be a playground for foreign powers. But this fight is not just about military presence. It is about the economic systems that have kept Africa dependent on the West. For years, Western countries have extracted Africa's resources, leaving the continent impoverished and underdeveloped. The wealth generated by Africa's gold, oil, diamonds, and other resources has not benefited the people of Africa. Instead, it has lined the pockets of foreign corporations and governments. Traoré's vision for Burkina Faso is one of self-reliance. He has already taken steps to nationalize the country's gold mines, ensuring that the wealth generated from these resources stays within the country. This is a direct challenge to the global financial system, which has for too long allowed foreign companies to extract Africa's wealth without giving anything in return. Burkina Faso's new direction is a bold declaration that Africa will no longer be a passive participant in the global economy. It will take charge of its own resources and its own future. The struggle against colonial powers is not a new battle for Africa. For centuries, foreign powers, primarily European countries, have pillaged Africa's resources, leaving behind a legacy of broken societies, underdevelopment, and exploitation. These foreign powers did not just extract Africa's gold, diamonds, and oil. They also systematically undermined the continent's cultures, agricultural practices, and political structures. For decades, Africa has been caught in a cycle of dependence and exploitation, where any attempt to break free from this system is met with resistance, manipulation, and fear tactics from the West. For Ibrahim Traoré, the fight against colonialism is not just a fight against military occupation, but also against the deeply ingrained economic structures that have kept African nations subservient to the West. The hypocrisy of foreign aid has long been a point of contention in Africa. While Western powers and institutions pour billions of dollars in humanitarian aid into the continent each year, they simultaneously extract vast amounts of wealth from the very same countries. The so-called aid is a mechanism for control, not empowerment. France exists today thanks to our ancestors, Traoré has said. They should pray for us, not ask us for thanks. For years, you have taken from us, and now you expect gratitude. His statement highlights the resentment that many African leaders and citizens feel about the persistent exploitation by former colonial powers. France, in particular, has maintained a stranglehold on many African nations through military bases, economic agreements, and control over vital resources. The French presence in Africa is not one of altruism, as it often claims to be, but one of ongoing economic and political manipulation. While France and other Western powers continue to tout their humanitarian efforts in Africa, they are simultaneously undermining the continent's economic independence. For example, French companies have long dominated the mining and energy sectors in Africa, often extracting these resources without giving fair compensation to the local populations. At the same time, France maintains political influence through military presence and economic control via financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. This double standard has not gone unnoticed. Traoré and other African leaders are calling for an end to this charity system. They reject the idea that Africa should be grateful for aid that only serves to keep them in a state of dependency. We are not beggars, Traoré said. We want justice. We want sovereignty. We want to control our own destinies, not be subjected to the whims of foreign powers. In response to this hypocritical aid system, Traoré has sought to take concrete steps toward economic independence. He has been vocal about the need to dismantle the financial structures that keep African countries indebted and dependent. Burkina Faso, under his leadership, has refused loans from the IMF and the World Bank, preferring to rely on domestic resources and partnerships with other African countries and global players like Russia. This move is symbolic of a broader shift away from Western-dominated economic systems. Additionally, Traoré has taken steps to nationalize Burkina Faso's gold mines. Gold is one of the country's most valuable resources, yet much of the wealth generated from mining has historically been funneled out of the country, benefiting foreign corporations, while the people of Burkina Faso remain in poverty. By nationalizing the gold mines, Traoré ensures that more of the profits stay within the country, providing much-needed revenue for infrastructure education, and healthcare. The rejection of Western aid and loans is part of Traoré's broader vision of an independent Africa. He is calling on other African nations to follow Burkina Faso's lead in rejecting the exploitative systems that have kept them dependent on foreign powers for so long. The time for Africa to remain subjugated to foreign control is over. It is time for the continent to take control of its resources and its future, and Traoré is leading the charge. Africa no longer needs to be a charity case. It no longer needs to accept aid that only serves to perpetuate its dependency. What Africa needs is fair trade, mutual respect, and genuine partnerships based on equality, not exploitation. The rejection of foreign aid is not a rejection of cooperation, but rather a call for a new kind of relationship, one where Africa is treated as an equal partner, not as a source of resources to be drained and discarded. But the battle is far from over. The West, particularly France, has a vested interest in maintaining its influence in Africa. France's economic and military presence in the continent has long been a pillar of its geopolitical strategy, and it will not give up this influence easily. The resistance to the efforts of leaders like Traoré is already evident, as foreign powers attempt to undermine these movements through covert operations, military interventions, and financial pressure. But despite these challenges, Traoré remains resolute. "We will not be silenced," he has said. "We will not be cowards. Our children will ask us questions, and we will tell them that we fought for our independence. We fought for our future." The battle for Africa's independence is not just about rejecting foreign influence. It is about rewriting the continent's history. For too long, Africa's story has been written by outsiders, by colonial powers that saw the continent as little more than a resource to be exploited. But now, under leaders like Traoré, Africa is taking control of its own narrative. The fight for independence is not over, it is just beginning. The emergence of Ibrahim Traoré as the leader of Burkina Faso is more than just a political shift, it is a revolution. In just 2.5 years since assuming office, Traoré has transformed Burkina Faso's political landscape, and his actions are emblematic of a larger movement taking root across Africa. The changes in Burkina Faso are not merely symbolic, but are grounded in concrete actions aimed at dismantling the remnants of colonial influence and creating a new political and economic reality for the people of the country. Burkina Faso, once considered a stable yet underdeveloped nation, has undergone dramatic changes since Traoré's rise to power in January 2022. Under his leadership, the country has expelled French military forces, severing a long-standing military relationship that many saw as a vestige of colonialism. The French presence in Africa has often been justified by claims of fighting terrorism, but in reality, it has acted as a shield for France's geopolitical and economic interests. By removing French troops, Burkina Faso is sending a message to both France and the world. No longer will African nations tolerate being pawns in a geopolitical game. The French military presence in Africa has long been controversial. France maintains numerous military bases across the continent, particularly in former colonies, citing the fight against terrorism as a pretext for intervention. However, as Ibrahim Traoré rightly pointed out, this presence has been more about maintaining control than providing genuine security. The narrative of fighting terrorism has been used as an excuse to keep a hold on the region's resources and to maintain a military foothold that benefits French geopolitical interests. For many Africans, including Traoré, this kind of interventionism is no longer acceptable. In February 2023, just a month after taking office, Traoré ordered the expulsion of French troops from Burkina Faso. This bold move sent shockwaves through the political establishment, both in Africa and Europe. It was a definitive break from the past, a statement of independence that resonated not only in Burkina Faso, but across the African continent. Mali and Niger followed suit, expelling French military forces and signaling a shift in the region's political landscape. Traoré's decision to expel the French military is part of a broader vision of African self-determination. By removing foreign troops from the region, Burkina Faso is reclaiming its sovereignty and taking control of its future. The military, under Traoré's leadership, has become a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. It is no longer a tool of oppression, but an instrument of liberation for the people of Burkina Faso. The rise of military sovereignty in Burkina Faso is not just about rejecting France. It is about redefining the role of the military in African politics. For years, the military has been seen as an instrument of oppression, often used by authoritarian leaders to maintain control. But under Traoré, the military is being redefined as a force for positive change. It is the backbone of Burkina Faso's new political order, and it is leading the charge for African unity and independence. In the wake of the coup that brought him to power, Traoré has faced constant challenges to his leadership. Multiple coup attempts have been made to oust him from office, and foreign powers, particularly France, have been accused of backing these efforts. Despite these challenges, Traoré has remained resolute. He has refused to back down in the face of opposition, and he has continued to pursue his vision for a free and independent Burkina Faso. One of the most significant threats to Traoré's government came in the form of a coup attempt in the summer of 2023. This plot, allegedly orchestrated by forces loyal to France, sought to destabilize Burkina Faso and restore French influence. The coup attempt was foiled by Burkina Faso security forces, who were able to track the movements of the conspirators and prevent them from succeeding. This event was a stark reminder of the resistance that Traoré faces from both internal and external forces, but it also demonstrated the growing strength of Burkina Faso's military under his leadership. The resilience of Traoré and his government has become a source of inspiration for many in Africa. Burkina Faso's military, which was once seen as an instrument of tyranny, is now viewed as a symbol of defiance against foreign interference. The people of Burkina Faso, particularly the youth, have rallied behind Traoré's vision of a free and sovereign nation, and his government enjoys widespread support among the population. However, the revolution that Traoré is leading is not without its challenges. The country faces significant internal instability, with terrorism and insurgency taking hold in parts of the country. Approximately 40% of Burkina Faso's territory is now under the control of terrorist groups, and many schools and health clinics have been forced to close. This ongoing conflict is one of the greatest threats to Burkina Faso's stability, and it remains a major challenge for Traoré's government. Despite these challenges, Traoré remains steadfast in his commitment to defend the country's sovereignty and to combat terrorism on his own terms. In response to the growing terrorist threat, Traoré has made significant reforms to Burkina Faso's military. The country's military budget has been increased, and a rapid support force has been established to help fight insurgents in the northern regions. Traoré has also overseen the acquisition of advanced military technology, including drones and helicopters, to support the country's security forces. These investments in the military are part of Traoré's broader strategy to strengthen Burkina Faso's defense capabilities and reduce its dependence on foreign powers. But the fight for Burkina Faso's sovereignty is not just about military might. It is also about economic independence. One of the key pillars of Traoré's vision is the nationalization of Burkina Faso's natural resources. Gold, one of the country's most valuable resources, has long been exploited by foreign corporations. Traoré has taken steps to ensure that more of the profits from gold mining stay within the country, providing much-needed revenue for infrastructure development and social services. The nationalization of Burkina Faso's gold mines is a direct challenge to the global economic system that has long benefited foreign corporations at the expense of African nations. By taking control of its resources, Burkina Faso is sending a message to the world that Africa is no longer willing to be exploited. It is time for the continent to take charge of its own destiny and build a future that benefits its people, not foreign interests. Burkina Faso's revolution under Traoré is not just a political shift, it is a declaration of independence. The country is no longer content to remain a passive player in global politics. It is asserting its right to determine its own future. The military, once a tool of oppression, has become a symbol of resistance and empowerment, and Burkina Faso is leading the way for other African nations to follow. The message is clear. Africa is rising, and it will no longer be silenced. The actions of Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership are not an isolated case. They are part of a broader movement sweeping across West and Central Africa. Traoré's bold stance against French colonial influence and military presence has inspired other African nations to reconsider their relationships with former colonial powers. Countries like Mali and Niger have followed suit, expelling French troops from their territories and pursuing policies of greater independence and self-determination. This shift is no accident, but rather a response to the growing awareness among African leaders and their citizens that the old systems of control and dependence must be dismantled. The idea of African unity, long discussed in political circles, but often unattainable due to the influence of foreign powers, is now gaining traction. Traoré, along with leaders in Mali, Niger, and other countries, is calling for a new type of African cooperation, one that is based on mutual respect, shared interests, and a commitment to sovereignty. The era of one-sided relationships, where Africa is expected to play the role of subordinate partner to the West, is coming to an end. Under the banner of unity and sovereignty, these African nations are beginning to forge new alliances, not only with each other, but also with global powers that are willing to engage with Africa on equal terms. Russia, for example, has become an increasingly important partner for Burkina Faso and its neighbors. In 2023, Traoré's government signaled its willingness to work with Russia to combat terrorism and build up Burkina Faso's military capacity. The shift in alliances marks a significant departure from the West, and it reflects a desire for African countries to diversify their international relationships, no longer relying solely on Western powers that have historically exploited the continent. The idea of a united Africa is not a new one. The African Union AU, created in 2001, was designed to promote unity, peace, and security across the continent. However, the AU has been criticized for its lack of effectiveness and its failure to address the root causes of Africa's problems, particularly the continued influence of former colonial powers. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso is leading the charge for a new kind of African unity, one that is not just about symbolic gestures, but about tangible actions that will ensure the continent's political and economic independence. In the Sahel region, countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are beginning to coordinate their efforts to combat terrorism and insurgency. These countries have been plagued by extremist groups for years, and the response from Western powers has often been inadequate or misdirected. Traoré has been vocal about his dissatisfaction with the way Western countries, particularly France, have handled the situation. For years, French military forces have been deployed in the Sahel under Operation Barkhane, a mission designed to combat terrorism and maintain stability. However, the situation has only worsened, with terrorist groups expanding their influence across the region. Traoré and other African leaders are increasingly questioning the effectiveness of Western-led interventions and are exploring alternative solutions. As a result, the countries of the Sahel are beginning to work together more closely. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have formed a strategic alliance to tackle terrorism, with a focus on joint military operations and intelligence sharing. This collaboration is a powerful example of African nations taking ownership of their security and working together to address their common challenges. Traoré has made it clear that Africa's security will no longer be dictated by external powers. It will be shaped by the collective efforts of African nations themselves. In addition to security, economic cooperation is also becoming a priority for these countries. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, has long been dependent on foreign aid and loans, often from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank. These loans come with strings attached, placing African nations in a cycle of debt that is difficult to escape. But under Traoré's leadership, Burkina Faso is taking steps to break free from this cycle. The country is exploring new economic partnerships with other African nations and global players who are willing to engage on fairer terms. The goal is to create a more self-sustaining economy that relies less on foreign aid and more on the continent's own resources. This regional cooperation is not limited to the Sahel. Across Africa, there is a growing recognition that the continent's future lies in unity. African nations are increasingly speaking with one voice in international forums, demanding fairer trade agreements, better representation, and a stronger role in global decision-making. The movement toward regional unity is gaining momentum, and it is clear that Africa is no longer content to be a passive participant in global affairs. Instead, the continent is asserting its right to shape its own future. Traoré's leadership is helping to fuel this movement, and his vision of an independent, united Africa is resonating with leaders and citizens alike. The time of division and external control is coming to an end, and a new era of African unity and sovereignty is beginning. It is a movement that is not just about politics, but about the future of Africa's people. The message is clear. Africa is rising, and it will no longer be silenced. As more African nations join the movement, the impact of Traoré's leadership is becoming increasingly evident. Burkina Faso's actions have sparked a wave of change across the continent, and other countries are beginning to follow in its footsteps. The days of Africa being a pawn in the geopolitical game are over. The continent is asserting its independence, its sovereignty, and its right to control its own destiny. This is a revolution, not just in Burkina Faso, but across Africa. Ibrahim Traoré's vision for Africa goes beyond the immediate challenges facing Burkina Faso and the Sahel region. It is a vision for the entire continent, one where Africa is free from the grip of foreign powers, where African nations are united in their pursuit of peace, prosperity, and dignity. This vision is not just about political sovereignty. It is about cultural and economic self-determination. Traoré's call to decolonize our minds is central to his vision. For too long, Africa has been taught to view itself through the lens of its colonizers. The legacy of colonialism runs deep, and it has shaped Africa's political, economic, and cultural systems in ways that have held back progress for centuries. Traoré believes that the first step in breaking free from this legacy is to change the way Africans think about themselves. We have to stop thinking like the old bosses, he says. It's time to start thinking for ourselves, for the happiness and future of our people. This shift in mindset is crucial to the success of the African Revolution. Africa's true potential lies not in its natural resources, but in the creativity, resilience, and determination of its people. Traoré's leadership is a testament to the power of self-belief. Under his guidance, Burkina Faso is rejecting the systems that have held it back, and it is embracing a new future, one that is defined by African leadership, African innovation, and African unity. For Traoré, the fight for Africa's independence is not just about getting rid of foreign troops or rejecting foreign aid. It is about reclaiming Africa's pride, identity, and agency. It is about creating a world where African countries can stand on their own, free from the shackles of exploitation and control. Africa will not kneel, Traoré declares. We will rise. We will take back what is ours. We will write our own history. This vision for Africa's future is a bold one, but it is one that is gaining traction. Across the continent, Africans are waking up to the reality that the old systems of control no longer serve them. They are rejecting the narrative that Africa is destined to be subjugated by foreign powers, and they are embracing the idea that Africa's future is in its own hands. The youth of Africa, in particular, are leading the charge for change, and they are demanding a seat at the table when it comes to shaping the continent's future. Traoré's vision for Africa is not without its challenges. The continent faces numerous obstacles, including political instability, poverty, and the ongoing threat of terrorism. But Traoré remains steadfast in his belief that Africa's greatest strength lies in its unity. When we come together, there is nothing that can stop us, he says. Together, we can build the Africa that our children deserve. As the movement for African independence gains momentum, Traoré's leadership will undoubtedly play a central role in shaping the future of the continent. His message is simple, yet powerful. Africa's future belongs to its people, and it is time for Africa to take control of its destiny.